Imagine waking up every day with the feeling that something is missing, but without being able to name exactly what it is. You get up, brush your teeth, grab your phone, reply to messages, go to work or school, and complete a series of tasks that weren't defined by you, but by an invisible set of social, familial, and cultural expectations. You go with the flow as if caught in a current you never chose to swim in. This is the unconscious reality most people live in, an automated routine silently programmed by beliefs that have never been questioned. There's no pause to reflect. No space to ask, do I really want this? Does this life belong to me, or am I just repeating inherited patterns? Without realizing it, we are trapped in a script someone else wrote for us, and the most dangerous part is that we believe we are the authors of this story. The unconscious life shows up in subtle yet powerful ways. It hides in the quiet shoulds. I should be married by 30, I should have a stable job, I should behave a certain way to be accepted. These shoulds are not your voice, they are echoes of the outside world reverberating inside you. It's like an invisible lens that distorts reality and blocks your vision of the true path. The danger is living an entire life as a character, an avatar created to socially survive, but deeply disconnected from the soul. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That means that as long as we don't question who we really are, our choices aren't truly choices, they are reactions. It's as if we are hypnotized, walking in circles, seeking meaning in things that will never truly fulfill us. And the saddest part is that this kind of life creates a silent emptiness, a chronic discomfort that people try to silence with distractions. Social media, consumerism, external validation. They feel something is wrong but can't name this wrongness, because they don't know there is another way to live. So they keep adapting, keep playing roles, the successful professional, the perfect mother, the ideal partner, even if, inside, they are falling apart. The unconscious drives their decisions, their relationships, even their desires. People think they want certain things, but in reality, they were conditioned to want them. They are numb, confusing comfort with purpose. But living unconsciously is not truly living. It is surviving within a system that rewards conformity and punishes authenticity. And until that illusion is broken, the true self remains buried, waiting for the awakening that can change everything. There is a moment, sometimes sudden, sometimes as slow as the rising sun, when the soul begins to whisper louder than the noise of the world. It's when something inside you says, this can't be all there is. The routine starts to feel tight, like clothes that no longer fit. The certainties that once guided you begin to waver. This is the first sign of the possibility of liberation. To liberate yourself in this context isn't to run away from life, it's to wake up within it. It's to stop living on autopilot and start consciously taking the wheel. It's looking at everything you've ever learned and for the first time asking, is this really mine or was it placed in me? That question, so simple, carries transformative power. Because the moment you start seeing yourself clearly, the entire inner system that once held you prisoner begins to fall apart. It's the beginning of a return to home, not a physical place but the deepest place within you, where your truth resides. Liberation begins with awareness, and awareness is like lighting a candle in a dark room. At first, you can only see what's close. A toxic habit, a limiting belief, a repressed emotion. But as the light grows, more aspects of your life come into view. You realize you were searching for love where there was only emotional hunger, chasing success where there was only a need for validation, and clinging to stability that was rooted in fear. And that realization can be painful, because it dismantles the persona you built to feel safe. But it is also liberating because you understand that you no longer need to perform. You can finally be. And in that moment, something shifts energetically. What once controlled you, the opinions of others, the fear of failure, the need to please, loses its power. You begin to make decisions that align with your heart, even if the world doesn't understand. This is what true liberation is, not a scream of rebellion but a quiet, unwavering truth that says, I have found myself. The most beautiful part of this journey is that it doesn't require you to abandon your outer life, only that you start living it from the inside out. You can still work, love, create, care, but now you do all of it from a conscious place. You stop being a reactor and become a creator. And in that state, extraordinary things begin to happen. Synchronicities, meaningful encounters, unexpected opportunities. Because the universe doesn't respond to what you say, it responds to what you vibrate. And when your vibration comes from authenticity, reality begins to reorganize around you. It's as if the world says, now you are awake. Now we can dance together. The possibility of liberation is always present, but it requires courage. Courage to look at yourself without filters. Courage to unlearn. Courage to choose the new even with no guarantees. But those who accept this call discover that the life they always dreamed of isn't out there waiting. It's already inside, asking to be born. Finding yourself is not like finding a lost object. It's not simple, straightforward, or linear. It's a crossing, a journey filled with twists, distorted mirrors, and inner doors that often refuse to open. That's because the self we seek is not a single piece waiting to be discovered. It's a mosaic of memories, traumas, desires, intuitions, and possibilities. Every part of you holds a truth but also an illusion. That's why finding yourself hurts. Because before you can meet who you are, you must release who you are not. You have to look into the mirror of your masks, and that requires brutal honesty. It demands the courage to admit that what you often defend so fiercely is just a defense mechanism. And at the same time, it requires compassion. Because no one gets lost on purpose. We get lost trying to survive. There are moments in this search when everything feels confusing. You begin to sense that you no longer fit into the old, but haven't yet found yourself in the new. This is what we call no man's land, a liminal space between the old self and the authentic self. And this phase is especially difficult because in it you may feel unstable, indecisive, even empty. But the emptiness is not absence. Emptiness is gestation. It's the ground where the new is being formed. The complexity of finding yourself lies precisely in this, in the fact that you are becoming something you cannot yet name. There is no map for this journey. What exists is an inner compass, and that compass only works when you silence the external noise. When you stop seeking ready-made answers and begin listening to what is alive within you. That listening is the true portal to meeting yourself. And even when you begin to glimpse more authentic parts of who you are, a subtle sabotage often arises. Comparison. The mind starts to say, but you're not ready yet. Look how awakened that person is. You should be more like. And this comparison disconnects you from your essence. Because the process of finding yourself is radically individual. You can be inspired by teachers, books, experiences, but no one can live your truth for you. And your truth doesn't need to look extraordinary. Sometimes it's quiet, simple, intimate. Finding yourself is, above all, allowing yourself to be human. Allowing yourself to make mistakes, to change your mind, to be reborn. Because you are not a fixed point, you are a flow. And maybe the great secret isn't finding yourself in the traditional sense, but remembering each day who you are choosing to be. That is the true act of presence. And it's in that presence that the soul begins to bloom. Within every human being, there are forces operating silently, shaping thoughts, desires, and behaviors in ways that often escape conscious awareness. These forces are the archetypes, universal patterns of psychic energy that dwell in the collective unconscious, a concept developed by Carl Jung. Unlike individual memories that form the personal unconscious, the collective unconscious is like an ancestral library of the human soul, where symbols, images, and myths are stored, transcending cultures, time periods, and languages. When you feel a sudden identification with the figure of a hero, a mother, a sage, or even a traitor, even if you can't explain why, you are likely coming into contact with one of these archetypes. They are not fictional characters, but living energies that express themselves through dreams, art, relationships, and even psychological symptoms. The impact of archetypes on everyday life is profound, and often invisible. A clear example is the archetype of the shadow, which represents everything we repress, deny, or deem undesirable in ourselves. When we don't face the shadow, it manifests externally. We project our fears, judgments, and rejections onto other people, into our relationships, or even onto public figures. The shadow is not inherently evil. It carries parts of our vital energy that have been exiled. The hero archetype, on the other hand, drives us to overcome challenges, face symbolic dragons and seek our personal truth. But when it dominates the psyche, it can lead to an obsession with achievement, causing us to abandon vulnerability. Then there's the sage, symbolizing the search for meaning, and the jester, who embodies the power of lightness and spontaneity. All of these archetypes coexist within us in varying degrees, and they can either guide or imprison us, depending on how consciously we engage with them. The journey of self-knowledge inevitably involves recognizing these archetypes at work in our psyche. When we are unaware of them, we are like puppets, moved by internal narratives we didn't consciously choose. We may spend our entire lives trying to be the savior for everyone, living under the rule of the wounded healer archetype, or obsessively chasing validation, trapped in the orphan archetype. But when we begin to name these patterns, when we learn to observe them with clarity, something magical happens. We stop being just characters and become co-authors of our inner script. By integrating the archetypes with awareness, we begin to use their power in our favor, rather than being ruled by them. It's as if we awaken within the collective dream of humanity, and finally gain the freedom to choose how we live, how we love, and how we evolve. Since ancient times, myths have been far more than just stories meant to entertain. They served as mirrors of the human soul, symbolic maps that taught people how to understand their own internal cycles: birth, loss, transformation, and rebirth. Jung realized that these myths were not merely cultural inventions, but direct manifestations of archetypes from the collective unconscious. The myth of Persephone, for example, abducted by Hades and taken to the underworld, is also a symbolic narrative of many women who go through an inner descent, a separation from innocence, and a reconnection with the depths of their own soul. Likewise, the myth of Hercules and his 12 labors is not just a heroic tale. It's a metaphor for the process of individuation, where the ego must confront immense psychic forces, its inner monsters, to attain consciousness. These myths remain alive because their archetypes are still active within us. Even without realizing it, many people reenact mythical patterns in their lives, marrying the wounded king, living as spiritual orphans, or identifying as healers who are unable to heal themselves. In real life, archetypes manifest through the roles people take on, often unconsciously, in relationships, at work, in families, and in their own inner narratives. A woman who constantly feels the need to save others may be under the influence of the Great Mother archetype. A man who sabotages relationships out of fear of intimacy might be living through the wounded lover. These patterns are not fixed labels, but living energies that flow through the psyche, activating deep aspects of the self. When we're not aware, we can become trapped in a single archetype, repeating the same story with different faces. But when we gain awareness of these inner myths, we can begin to change the narrative. It's like realizing we are not just living a story, we have the power to rewrite it. Not by denying the myths, but by honoring and transcending them at the same time. What's most fascinating is that archetypes are not inherently good or bad. The same archetype that can lead someone to destruction can also lead to healing and transcendence. It all depends on how we relate to it. The warrior, for instance, can become a tyrant when disconnected from the heart, but can also be a protector of truth, justice, and purpose. When we recognize the myths we're living, we can begin a deep inner dialogue. Which archetype is most active in me right now? What story have I been unconsciously repeating? By bringing these questions to consciousness, the mythical journey becomes a path to liberation. Myths, then, are no longer just tales from the past. They become living tools of self-awareness, helping us find meaning, direction, and inner power amidst the chaos of modern life. Cap 06 Within every human being resides both a hero and a shadow. And contrary to what many believe, this battle doesn't happen out in the world, against visible enemies. It takes place in the silent field of the psyche. The hero is that part of us that seeks growth, courage, and transcendence. It is the hero who hears the soul's call and dares to face the unknown. But every heroic journey comes at a cost. The inevitable encounter with the shadow, that which has been rejected, repressed, or forgotten within us. Jung called this shadow the other side of the personality, a psychic force that contains not only negative traits but also unrealized potential. When we deny the shadow, it doesn't disappear. On the contrary, It gains power in the unconscious and begins to manifest through impulsive behaviors, emotional sabotage, projections onto others, and even psychosomatic illness. The hero, in order to be whole, must face this dark side, not to destroy it but to integrate it. The true battle is not against the shadow but against the refusal to see it. This inner conflict can take many forms in daily life. It's the successful professional who secretly feels empty and self-destructive. It's the spiritual person who preaches love but can't cope with their own anger. It's the devoted mother who carries guilt for craving freedom. All of these tensions reveal a struggle between the ideal self and the shadow that demands to be seen. When the hero tries to ignore the shadow takes control, sometimes silently, other times explosively. That's why the true hero is not the one who defeats their darkness, but the one who dives into it with courage and brings to light what had been forgotten. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." This is the turning point, when the hero stops fighting against themselves and begins to engage with their pain, their trauma, and their inner contradictions. It is the integration of the shadow that makes the hero human, deep, and real. It's what keeps them from becoming arrogant or fanatical. A hero who denies their shadow becomes a masked tyrant. But the one who embraces it transforms vulnerability into strength. This is the moment when the hero's journey meets the spiritual path, when we realize we are not here to be perfect, but to be whole. And wholeness is only possible when we embrace the full spectrum of who we are: light and darkness, courage and fear, love and anger, wisdom and confusion. The battle between hero and shadow is not about defeating one side and eliminating the other, but about building a bridge between these two inner worlds. It's at this point that the psyche aligns with the soul, and the human being ceases to be a divided fragment, becoming instead a center of presence and profound awareness. One of the most common and most dangerous mistakes people make on the journey of self-discovery is trying to eliminate or suppress the shadow. As if it were possible to erase from consciousness everything we consider ugly, shameful, or unwanted. But what many fail to realize is that suppressing the shadow doesn't make it harmless. Quite the opposite. When repressed, it hides in the depths of the unconscious and acts in even more destructive ways. Carl Jung was clear in saying that whatever is not brought to consciousness comes to us as fate. This means that when we deny our fears, traumas, impulses, and anger, they don't disappear. They simply take on disguised forms, sabotaging our relationships, choices, and even our physical and mental health. A person who suppresses their anger, for example, may develop chronic body tension or panic attacks. Someone who represses their desire for freedom may grow emotionally ill within structures they themselves created. To suppress the shadow is to try to silence a voice that will keep screaming from behind the curtains of the mind. The problem is that society often reinforces this repression. From a young age, we're taught what is acceptable and what is wrong to feel. We're rewarded for being nice, quiet, and obedient, and punished when we express intense emotions, sexuality, aggression, or sadness. Over time, these natural parts of the human experience are pushed into the basement of the psyche. We create social masks that make us look functional on the outside, while leaving us deeply disconnected on the inside. Even on spiritual paths, the shadow is often ignored. People chase light, love, and peace, while anger, jealousy, envy, and pain are denied as if they were moral flaws. The result is toxic spirituality, where healing is talked about but fragmentation is lived. True healing only happens when there is space for everything we are, including what frightens us. The shadow is not the enemy. The real enemy is our refusal to face it with honesty. And here lies the great paradox. The more we try to suppress the shadow, the more power it gains over us. The repressed shadow gets projected onto those around us. We judge in others what we cannot accept in ourselves. We harshly criticize behaviors that, unconsciously, also live within us. In doing so, we perpetuate cycles of pain, guilt, and conflict. Liberation only begins when we stop running and choose to face the shadow head-on. When we name our fears, acknowledge our most primitive impulses, and understand that feeling anger, sadness, or desire doesn't make us less spiritual, it makes us more human. The shadow doesn't need to be healed, as if it were a disease. It needs to be recognized as an essential part of the psyche. And when we do that, something powerful happens. We are no longer controlled by what we deny, and we begin to walk with greater authenticity, clarity, and compassion, for ourselves and for the world around us. Within the deep structure of the human psyche, according to Carl Jung, there exist two fundamental archetypes that live within every person, regardless of biological gender: the anima and the animus. These archetypes represent the inner feminine and the inner masculine, and understanding them is essential for anyone seeking true integration of the self. The anima is the image of the feminine that resides within a man, symbolizing everything society associates with femininity, such as intuition, sensitivity, receptivity, and the deep emotional world. The animus, on the other hand, is the masculine figure that exists within a woman, associated with rationality, assertiveness, willpower, and protection. These archetypes are shaped by interactions with parental figures, cultural influences, and personal experiences, but they operate on an unconscious level, influencing behavior, dreams, and relationships. Recognizing and integrating these archetypes is crucial because they serve as bridges to self-knowledge and inner balance. When the anima or animus is poorly integrated or repressed, it can create inner conflict, such as difficulty expressing emotions, a distorted view of love, or extreme behaviors in relationships. For instance, a man who rejects his anima may become overly rigid, overly rational, and disconnected from his feelings. A woman who does not acknowledge her animus may struggle with insecurity when making decisions or asserting boundaries. This imbalance can also lead to projection, attributing to a partner, friend, or colleague qualities and flaws that actually belong to our own inner feminine or masculine, leading to relationships burdened by unrealistic expectations and emotional pain. The integration of the anima and animus is a process that demands courage and patience, as it involves accepting parts of ourselves that are often denied or made invisible by culture, and sometimes even by our own minds. It means recognizing that within every man lies a rich and deep emotional world, just as within every woman there is a powerful rational force. This inner union is essential for the development of what Jung called the self, the totality of the psyche that harmonizes the conscious and unconscious. When this integration occurs, the individual reaches a dynamic equilibrium, where the inner feminine and masculine complement each other, promoting greater authenticity, creativity, and an expanded capacity to love, first oneself and then others. It is an invitation to expand our understanding of what it means to be human, beyond roles and stereotypes, diving into the complexity of the soul and the psyche. Individuation, a central concept in Carl Jung's analytical psychology, is the process through which a person becomes whole, fully authentic, not perfect in the conventional sense of the word. It's important to understand that individuation is not about chasing an unattainable ideal or following external standards of success and acceptance. Instead, it's about discovering and integrating the many facets of one's own psyche, including those parts we usually avoid or repress. This process requires a deep encounter with the unconscious, with the shadow, with archetypes, and with the multiple inner voices that shape our identity. Along this path, the individual begins to distance themselves from simplistic labels and the mass influence of culture, embracing their unique singularity, even when it includes imperfections, contradictions, and internal challenges. To individuate is, above all, a courageous journey of self-knowledge and radical acceptance. It means letting go of the constant need to please others, to conform to rigid social expectations, and instead to accept one's shadow, those hidden aspects that carry fears, traumas, repressed desires, and everything that doesn't fit the idealized self-image. In facing these parts of the inner world, the individual begins to break free from superficial masks and becomes more authentic, more aware of the motivations behind their thoughts, emotions, and actions. Individuation is not a final destination, but an ongoing and dynamic process, one of continual transformation, growing awareness, and deepening self-acceptance. Moreover, individuation expands one's self-perception beyond the ego, that small voice that judges, controls, and tries to manage life. The person begins to see that they are much more than their social roles, their flaws, or their virtues. A connection begins to emerge with the self, a Jungian concept that symbolizes the totality of the psyche, a point of balance between conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, light and shadow. True individuation brings integration and equilibrium, not perfection. It allows the human being to live with greater inner freedom, authenticity, and a profound sense of purpose. In essence, individuation is the path toward becoming whole, with all of your complexities, paradoxes, and beauty, rather than a product shaped by idealized perfection. The true self, from the perspective of depth psychology, especially within the Jungian framework, represents far more than the conscious identity we navigate within daily life. It is understood as an unlimited awareness, a fundamental essence that transcends the ego and the constraints of the rational mind. This true self is the spark of light that illuminates the entire inner experience, the silent presence that observes and integrates all dimensions of the psyche. Unlike the ego, which is finite, conditioned, and often fragmented, the true self is infinite and holistic, as it holds the totality of being, uniting conscious and unconscious, masculine and feminine, thought and emotion, light and shadow. This unlimited awareness of the true self is not confined by concepts, beliefs, or social roles. It exists beyond the boundaries of personal identity. It becomes accessible when the individual frees themselves from surface-level identifications and the masks constructed for survival in the world. It is within this expanded state of consciousness that one discovers a profound sense of freedom, a deep connection with the whole and with an inner wisdom that cannot be grasped by logical thought. The true self reveals itself as a limitless source of peace, creativity, and authenticity, because it is connected to the universal essence of life, that invisible core that animates all things. Accessing this unlimited awareness is not a final destination, but a dynamic and continuous process. It involves cultivating presence, inner stillness, deep listening to the inner voices, and attunement to the flow of existence. As this connection strengthens, the individual begins to experience a sense of unity with themselves and the world, breaking free from the illusion of separation and isolation that so often dominates ego consciousness. This expansion of awareness allows the true self to guide life in a more integrated and meaningful way, enabling choices that are aligned with one's deepest purpose and essence. Ultimately, the true self, as unlimited consciousness, is an invitation to live a more authentic, liberated, and connected existence, rooted in the vastness of who we truly are. The illusion of the ego is one of the central concepts in depth psychology and spirituality, and to truly understand it, we must first grasp how the ego forms and operates. The ego is the conscious identity we build throughout life, made up of our beliefs, memories, social roles, opinions, and everything we define as who we are. It functions as the organizer of experience, a kind of center of personality that helps us navigate the world, ensuring survival and adaptation. However, the ego is essentially a limited, fragmented, and transient construction. It creates a sense of separation between the I and the other, between mind and body, and between the individual and the external world, generating a false impression of a fixed, permanent identity. This illusion of the ego is powerful because it traps consciousness within a restricted level, confined by its own structures, fears, desires, and defenses. The ego tries to protect this identity to maintain a sense of control, but this often leads to suffering, anxiety, alienation, and inner disconnection. Frequently, the ego reacts with resistance to changes or challenges that threaten its stability, causing internal and external conflicts. This constant defense keeps the individual stuck in repetitive patterns, preventing true expansion of consciousness and the encounter with the deeper self. On the other hand, the truth of the self, or the true self as many spiritual and psychological traditions point out, reveals a much broader and deeper reality. The self is the totality of the psyche, including not only the conscious ego but also the unconscious, archetypes, the shadow, and all aspects that compose human personality and existence. Unlike the ego, the self is neither fragmented nor limited. It is the complete and integrated essence of being, transcending duality and separation. The self is the source of authenticity, wisdom, balance, and wholeness, the true center of inner identity. Awakening to this truth of the self involves a process of disidentifying from the ego, recognizing its limitations, and making room for the integration of the hidden parts of the psyche. It is the journey of realizing that the ego is only a small part of the whole, and that true identity lies beyond masks and illusions. When this happens, the person experiences an expansion of consciousness, feeling more connected to themselves and to the universe, living with greater authenticity, freedom, and inner peace. Thus, understanding the illusion of the ego and the truth of the self is essential for any path of self-knowledge and profound transformation. Concluso. In the end, this journey is not about reaching a state of perfection, but about remembering who you truly are beyond the masks, roles, and limitations imposed by the conditioned mind. By recognizing the illusion of the ego and allowing the self, that vast, silent, and integrated consciousness, to emerge, you access a new level of clarity, presence, and inner truth. It is not about rejecting the ego but about putting it in service of the soul. The path of individuation is, in fact, the path of return, a dive into the unconscious to reclaim the lost fragments of your essence and thus emerge as a whole, authentic, and awakened being. And perhaps, in the silence that follows this whole process, you realize that nothing was ever out of place. That chaos, falls, and confrontations were merely disguised invitations for you to remember your real nature. The self is not a distant goal. It already dwells within you now, waiting only for you to recognize it.